indeed, Mr. Kolata, for your insightful keynote and your vision for making the Indian experience central to education. And reminds us that technology is not just a tool, but a catalyst to inspire, to include, and to transform how learning happens in every classroom. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we move to a truly enriching segment of the day, the thought leadership session titled Who Am I? As artificial intelligence continues to reshape our world, the session invites us to reflect on the deeper questions of identity, ethics, and human purpose in an age of machines. And to help us navigate these profound themes, we are privileged to hear from one of India's most respected voices. And let's put our hands together to welcome Shri Gurcharan Das ji, an acclaimed author, management guru, and public intellectual. And I would invite Mr. Manit Jain, co-founder Arise, to kindly do the honors of welcoming and honoring Shri Gurcharan Das ji with a green certificate and a shawl. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Das is best known for his internationally best-selling book, India Unbound. His book, India Unbound, has been translated into multiple languages and acclaimed as a seminar work on Indian economic rise. His trilogy on classical goals of life, India Unbound, The Difficulty of Being Good, and Karma, The Riddle of Desire, has established him as one of the finest interpreters of India's cultural and economic journey. A former CEO of Procter & Gamble India and now a leading public intellectual, he writes widely in the world's most influential journals and newspapers, offering deep insights into photography, policy, and human development. And ladies and gentlemen, it's an absolute honor to welcome Shri Gurcharan Das ji to deliver his special address on Who Am I? Over to you, sir.
Don't believe a word that she said. She called me a management guru. Let me quickly tell you what that is. GU stands for good at understanding. RU stands for relatively useless. That is a management guru. Richard, hard act to follow. No sexy PowerPoint that I have to give you. But what I shall do is to talk about tradition, technology, and empathy. And I've been encouraged to do so as a storyteller, which is what a writer ultimately is. A storyteller where I'll be giving you snippets from my own journey of learning. My own education and my own my truck with both technology and empathy. My name, of course, I trashed guru, but my name contains that word, but didn't always. At the age of 3, my mother gave me the name Ashok Kumar, which is a prince of happiness, a perfectly nice name. But my grandmother suspected that my mother gave me that name because she thought my mother was secretly in love with a Bollywood actor named Ashok Kumar. Now, Ashok Kumar in the 1940s was a combination of Amitabh Bachchan and Shah Rukh Khan. So you can imagine. Anyway, my grandmother didn't think that was suitable, so she took me to her guru. Now, this is a different kind of guru. And she placed me at his feet and she told the Guru, Guruji enu naandyo. And the Guru saw me there, and he says, well, let's call him Gurcharan Das. And so I was transformed overnight from the Prince of Happiness, Ashok Kumar, to the humble servant of the feet of the Guru. And so when I, some years later, when I grew up, I went to see the Guru, and I said, why did you give me that name? And he said, son, it's a good thing to be reminded of humility. But then he gave me the best definition of humility that I've ever heard. And talk about learning moments, education. He said, humility means to take your work seriously, but not yourself seriously. And I think, and that of course has become almost a motto that a good teacher or a good parent would have given to a person. And it also is the dedication of my latest book, which is dedicated to the happy few who don't take themselves seriously. One of my earliest memories is when I'm 4 years old. This is Lahore, before the partition, but it's 1947, March. And I'm running home from kindergarten with a report card. And my mother's standing at the door, and she sees the smile on my face, and she says, did you stand first? And my father is nearby, and he tells her, that was the wrong question. You should be asking him, what does he like about school? Remembering Jim Knight's morning statistic. She asks him, does he like to draw? Does he like stories? Does he like the food in his school? Does he like his friends? And so very early, I was introduced to these two words, two expressions. One was my mother with her Punjabi middle-class insecurities, who was always going to tell me that one day I'd have to make a living. And then fortunately, I had a father who was more relaxed, a spiritual man who was also an engineer and who always told her, yes, he has to make a living, but he also has to make a life. So this dichotomy, if you will, has in a sense defined my life. And really, when I think about it, that it was, it must be the same in UK or Australia, but certainly in India, we are told by our mothers and our fathers, study hard, get good marks, so you can get into a good college. I'm reminded of, again, Lord Knight's expression about university admissions. And then we are told you get into university and you do well, and then you're going to get a good job. And then we get good jobs, and then we get, this is, the Indian middle class dream. Then we are supposed to get married, and then we have children, and then we repeat the same cycle with our children. And so we get a bigger house, maybe a bigger car. And then, and somewhere in our 40s, it really hits us that, is this what life was all about? And that's really the question which I think my father was trying to answer when I was 4 years old. And that's the question that education also is meant to answer. So I'm really echoing some of the same thoughts that you've heard from others. And in my case, when I was 17, so I've jumped from kindergarten to 17, 4 to 17, and I had this unbelievable good fortune of getting a scholarship to go to Harvard to be an undergraduate. And my mother, I remember, Palam Airport in Delhi, it's now called T1. That little airport is, Air India flight is waiting to take me away. My mother has tears in her eyes. She's saying goodbye. And in between her tears, she says, make sure you study something useful now. You've got to get a job when you come back. And so she says, why don't you be like your father? Become an engineer. So dutifully, I arrive at Harvard. I go to the dean's office. I write down my major, engineering. But I have a roommate. I have a roommate who's studying Russian history and Russian literature. And he's reading Anna Karenina. And one day at lunch, he says, Gurcharan, if you're going to have an affair with a married woman one day, it should be someone like Anna Karenina. And then he begins to catalog the virtues of Anna Karenina. And while he's doing that, I'm thinking something is wrong. Here I'm calculating pipe friction and mugging up Bernoulli's equations, and this guy is dreaming of sleeping with Anna Karenina. And so, promptly I go to the dean's office and I strike out engineering. And luckily, in an American undergraduate college, you don't have to give your major until your third year. And so it remains empty, and the woman at the desk writes liberal arts. That's a good sort of... Anyway, so what do I study from then on? I study Greek tragedy. I study Roman history. I study politics, economics, philosophy. I read Aristotle about how to be happy. And he talks about eudaimonia and the flourishing life and all this. And it's an exciting... I even take a course in Sanskrit love poetry. And when my mother hears I'm studying Sanskrit at Harvard, she says, hi, mera munda. A dead language. Only the dead will now give him a job. But I graduate in philosophy, and I get a scholarship to go to Oxford to do a PhD in philosophy. And I'm home in Chandigarh with them. My parents live there. And I asked myself one day, do I really want to spend the rest of my life at that stratosphere of abstract thought? No. And so I want a life of action. But I have no clue what this life of action is. But my mother's, and I write off to Oxford that I'm not coming. And my mother discovers it, and her worst nightmare has come true. She has a grown-up, educated son at home, Vela. Vela is a Punjabi way of saying idle. He's idle. And we have a nosy neighbor who comes to have coffee with my mother in the morning. And she's asked every day, she asks her, Thoda munda ki kar raha hai? What is your son doing? And my mother, sheepishly embarrassed, says, I don't know. Mainu nahi pata. And I see her face, and I see the embarrassment on her face. And I said, no, I can't do this to her. So I immediately start looking at the newspaper or the wanted ads, and I discover an ad for a company that makes Vicks Vapor Rub. I apply. I guess they get impressed with my Harvard degree, and so I'm suddenly transported from the ivy-covered halls of Harvard and high thinking to the dusty bazaars of India, going from chemist shop to chemist shop, telling them, 1 dozen, 1 free, ek dozen, ek free, kitna mangta hai? And so it's a very different life. I like the rough and tumble of that life, though. But I'm sorry I'm going on with my life, but I'm really actually illustrating for you. I'm illustrating where we have some eminent people here arriving, and so we shall ignore them. Okay, well, I would suggest our eminent guests to sit down, and I'll carry on with my story, but I'll make it short. But essentially, the end point is here, making a living, making a life, and suddenly being transported from an promising academic career to a promising business career that ended up in my becoming the CEO of the company, and then at 50, quitting that world to become a writer. So I won't go into the rest. There's a lot of fun in it, but you can read it all, a commercial message, in my memoir called Another Sort of Freedom. And if you don't, and what is that freedom? That freedom is what the Guru told me, is the freedom that comes from not taking yourself too seriously. And that leads to a life. Another Sanskrit word, let me introduce you, is laghima. Laghima is being light. Patanjali mentions it in his Yoga Sutras, and he calls it as one of the benefits of yoga, in fact, is lightness, laghima. It's one of the siddhis. And so, not taking oneself too seriously, not worrying too much about who gets the credit. And so the story of Another Sort of Freedom, it's the fourth of the trilogy she introduced me by, which we call moksha. Now, moksha is a very spiritually laden, religiously laden word. But in my sense, it's this, not to worry too much about who takes the credit and get on with the job. Anyway, so now, where does AI come in? And that's what I was told to talk about. So don't mind. I'm going to have to read a little bit. So it'll be quicker. Otherwise, I'll be fumbling. I got a call one evening last winter in Delhi. On the other side was a charming voice inviting me to be the author, guide, and tutor for an AI book on the Bhagavad Gita. my immediate reaction was fascination and horror. Two words that come to my mind at the thought of AI. But AI and the Gita, I asked myself. Well, and it opened up the same questions of self, identity, and authenticity, which the Gita itself addresses. And how did I feel like to be cloned by a machine? Did I suddenly have a twin? The charming voice at the other end must be human, I thought. In the way, how did I get that idea? Because it laughed spontaneously at my reaction without being able to see me, and maybe it was just sort of an invisible body reaction language that it detected. So I was skeptical. I am not a Gita scholar, nor a guru, and there are plenty of those. So why, I asked, did you pick me? He replied, in your book, The Difficulty of Being Good, you explored the concept of dharma in the Mahabharata, but instead of taking us back 2,000 years to the glory that was India, to the wonder that was India, you actually brought the Mahabharata to the 21st century. Now that's what we'd like you to do, to the Gita. I was impressed and flattered, and he went on to tell me that they were bringing out classics of the world. This is a New York publisher, classics of the world, and they'd chosen the Gita from India. They had already brought out Charles Dickens's Tale of Two Cities with Margaret Atwood as their guide, and now they were next bringing out Salman Rushdie as a guide for Candide by Voltaire. So I was in pretty good company, I felt. So where does AI fit in? I asked. And patiently he explained that we encourage the reader to pause, and we'll pause and ask a question. If they don't understand something, the reader can just pause the text while reading. And also at the end of every chapter, we encourage the reader to have a discussion on the subject of that chapter. And there would be a discussion with my clone. And the answers to those questions would come from my clone. And they were going to translate the book into 25 languages, and so I'd have 25 clones running around. I thought, wow, I wish I'd had a personal tutor when I was first reading the Gita and totally confused. I remember I had so many questions. Or when I was in the university and I had to read those wretched German philosophers, Kant, Nietzsche, Hegel, 2 a.m. in the morning, and here I had nobody to help me. So, I mean, it was, sorry about this, I'm sorry to be reading. The long and short of it is that I accepted, but we haven't yet signed the contract. because I still have questions. 9 months have gone by, and I've been working hard at this AI book now, and in the spirit of AI, I've hired 3 interns. One of them is ChatGPT, another one is Perplexity, the third one is Claude. And I have a backup in Gemini's Gemini. And my experience so far has been quite wonderful. ChatGPT is the most empathetic of all. So it's always the politest and always concerned, showing a lot of concern. In fact, one day I came home very worried about something, and I don't know, but I just happened to inform ChatGPT that I was having this problem. And she really came up with lots of concern and almost like a therapist. With Perplexity is the best for searching because she always gives me links and always gives me exactly what I should be reading to know further about that. And Claude, I like because I'm a writer, I like literature, and Claude is the most literary. So if you want somebody to write an essay for you, Claude is the one. Anyway, why is she a she? Well, I guess it's an instinctive, perhaps instinctive. In my case, I'll think about that. So these 3 competent interns have been cheerfully helping me. And what they have done is to lessen the load of research. You know, in India, everybody's brother-in-law has written a book on the Gita, a commentary on the Gita. And they've done it for 2,000 years. And so there are at least 2,000 commentaries that are in print right now. And so it is, and you know, let me not dwell on that. But the thing that there's something I feel though not quite right that's happening, despite all the help that they have been giving me. And what is not right is that I've begun to feel that while they have eased the labor and the invisible labor of research and the grunge work, and it's leaving me time to do a lot of explore some other things, that this work they're doing for me is not mine. You know, I don't feel the kind of ownership of the work. In other words, and even I forget now sometimes what they have dug up for me yesterday. And so there is a lingering question that if I had done the grunge work, maybe I might have learned a little more about the subject just because I had to work harder, perhaps. So that's one thing. And then, of course, I mean, the positive side is quite wonderful because they have given me time to do thinking that I may not have had time to do. For example, you know, I'm sort of a lateral thinking type, And the questions that have come into my mind are that I'd like to explore in my, because aside from doing this AI Gita book, I'm also going to do a series of essays in a conventional book on the Gita. And that's what has allowed me. And that convention, for example, one of the chapters of the book will be, what if the Buddha had been the charioteer of Arjuna? What answer would the Buddha have given rather than Krishna? Or what if Chanakya had been the charioteer? Chanakya would have said simply, after the Israeli attack on Iran a few months ago, you saw that. We saw how that drone went in and they took down the entire high command of the Iranian. And actually not just the high command, but the rabid ones in particular. So what the advice that Chanakya would have given would have been, just take down Duryodhan, Dushasan and Shakuni. And there'll be no war. Imagine this was a war in which everybody died at the end. Only a handful of people were left. And the Pandavas had to rule over an empty kingdom. Or, for example, after Hitler invaded Poland, it was very clear to the world that there was evil in the world. And if the Allies early on had just taken down Hitler and the top Nazis, Goebbels, Goering, Himmler, there'd be no Second World War. There'd be no Second World War, and I'm being told that my time's up. Okay, 5 minutes. That's generous. I could go on. Anyway, my point is, 50 million people died. 50 million, 5 crore people died in the Second World War. And you could have saved all that. So, these are the sort of things that I would like to explore in my Gita book. And for whatever problems I may have pointed out, that this has been made possible, including the question I would like to raise in my book is that how is it possible that Mahatma Gandhi, the apostle of peace, and Himmler, the apostle of war, both carried the Gita every day. And Gandhi trained the Ashramites, and Himmler trained the SS officers from quoting from the Gita. Now, these are the interesting things which really brings the Gita now to us today, and which I would like to explore. Anyway, the point I got waylaid here, and I'm being told I've got 5 minutes, and that's a difficult thing to do, but I shall try. Basically, I worry about being cloned by a machine. I ask myself, what will my friends think of me spouting fake rubbish? Will my twin know my thoughts, memories, things I don't want to talk about? What if a friend of mine actually developed a closer relationship with my compassionate clone? I'd feel jealous, cheated, and a fool. It feels eerie having someone around giving talks like these, making podcasts, racking up thousands of listeners. Worse, what if my clone cleaned up my bank account, confirmed on the phone via transactions via voice recognition software? So AI raises fundamental questions in my mind about what it is to be human. And the only thing I'm sure of at this moment are the thoughts and feelings going through my head. And if I look into my consciousness, I cannot find the thinker of my thoughts, the feeler of my feelings. Western philosophers and neuroscientists have tried to locate the self, but they haven't found it so far. The Gita claims that my identity, Gita also says that it's an illusion created by the human ego. My true self, it says, is the Atma, which is identical with the Brahman. Awareness of the oneness of everything is the Gita's central teaching. Buddha also faced this problem, but reached the opposite conclusion and resigned himself to live with the no-self, anatma. AI has added a second layer of falsehood to my already fragile sense of self. Who am I is a question based on a lived experience, not to be answered by machine. The idea of a clone twin of my thoughts providing answers feels like betrayal, and already shaken by the realization that my exalted liberal self is a fictional narrator. AI has added a double fiction, leaving me totally befuddled. And Mark Twain must have felt this absurdity when he quipped, "There's no difference," he said, between fiction and non-fiction, except that fiction has to make sense. That AI may become sentient is my other fear. And before it happens, I believe, AI has formidable hurdles to cross. And I'm going to request 2-3 more minutes just to tell you the good news, that why I don't think it's a sentient AI is around the corner. It's not. And why? One, the human experience is inherently subjective and cannot be explained in objective terms. When I observe that red blouse of that lady who has just had a word with the gentleman next to her, I observe that redness, and it invokes all kinds of feelings of redness inside me. It could be the memory of blood oozing out of my brother's leg in an accident a few years ago, or the red cheeks of Renoir's young girl in that painting in the museum in Paris. Philosophers call this subjective content qualia. The question is, how will AI duplicate qualia? Which is the private, unspoken product of subjective consciousness of 8 billion human beings. Another obstacle is to replicate my brain's biological neuron-specific physiology in my subjective experience. AI may copy the objective red color of that blouse, which its wavelength is 650 nanometers, madam, but it cannot access my subjective redness that emerges from my brain's 86 billion neurons and 540 trillion synapses. Both these hurdles, according to me, lead to a third obstacle, which is essential. What is essential to human consciousness is spontaneity, a freedom to choose. That autonomy, the Gita tells me, comes from Atma. AI today can follow commands based on algorithms and data, but it has far to go to achieve that self-awareness. Anyway, I'm coming to the end, and I can just say, while I'm charmed by the wonderful possibilities of AI in teaching classics to the world, and we saw some very positive examples given today of that, but it cannot access my subjective redness that emerges. But rereading the Gita, however, has made me rethink my own values. And that's education comes in there. In the real world of work, when I worked for Procter & Gamble company, I was valued for being sharp, productive, efficient. But what I admired, the values I admired, were kindness and generosity, traits of failure in the real world. What is at stake in the end is our conception of success. The present crisis in public life around the world may be precisely this conception of success. And there are parallels between the Gita's lament and the things that we might say today about our own leaders. Thank you.